This video was sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit cardkingdom.com/needsahone or click on the link below to visit their store. This video is also sponsored by Friends and Dragons, a great new mobile game. More on them in a moment. Hi everyone, I'm Needsahone, and today is Friday, and that means it's time for my 504th MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. I've looked at more than 60 different creature types in this series, but there's still a lot more out there, and today we're checking another one off the list with a look at monks. But before we talk about monks in Magic, let me tell you about monks in Friends and Dragons, the mobile game that is this video's special sponsor. Friends and Dragons is unique in that it's part puzzle game, part turn-based RPG. In the game, there are heroes with a variety of different classes who all take different actions and can attack in different ways during each of your turns. During your turn, you move your heroes around and try to find the best way to position them to defeat your enemies. Putting a team together with heroes of these various classes and finding synergies between them is a lot of fun. It's a lot like building a deck in Magic with different cards and colors that go well together. One of the classes in the game is monks. Monks are excellent at both dealing and absorbing damage. For example, Swiftcloud is a monk, and that means he can attack in all directions. You also don't have to worry about a monk's health that much because they recover some on every turn. You can take these heroes on all kinds of adventures, including through the game's massive 30-map campaign, co-op, PvP, and more. The game also has an amazing epic soundtrack, which you're hearing right now. If you download Friends and Dragons using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on the screen and play the game, you can support the channel without having to spend a dime, and in fact, you get to play a really neat free game. You'll also get one free summon, 4 days of energy potions, daily free summons, as well as new seasonal summons. Right now, you can take part in the Chase the Dragon event. You get to fight your way through a bunch of enemies for awesome rewards, and it's designed for new players, so you can start right after the tutorial. If you do decide to play, make sure you join my guild, the Hoopos. Now, let's get back to monks in Magic. In Magic, creatures who receive the monk creature type are generally those that dedicate themselves to spiritual introspection and meditation of one kind or another. Many of them also happen to be good at martial arts and/or magic as a result of their practices. The creature type made its debut in Champions of Kamigawa, but like a lot of creature types, it was also retroactively added to older creatures during Lorwyn's Grand Creature Type update a few years later. These days, it's an evergreen creature type, meaning we see it appear on a few cards in just about every single set. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have the monk creature type or be capable of creating a monk creature token. In all, there were 117 cards eligible for this list, and in this video, we'll take a look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours and World Championships. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Grand Prix and Magic Fests. At number 10, it's Stratus Dancer. This is the first of several Khans of Tarkir block monks that made this list. Whichever timeline on Tarkir we're talking about, there are a lot of monks associated with both the Jeskai of Khans of Tarkir and those who follow Ojutai in Dragons of Tarkir. Anyway, Stratus Dancer gives you two pretty good options. You can play it face up as a 2-mana 2/1 flyer, which is a nice aggressive stat line, or you can play it face down with Morph, and you can turn it face up at some point to counter an instant or sorcery. The Dancer will also be a 3/2 flyer if that's the route you take, and the total investment of 4 mana is actually quite the deal to counter a spell and get a creature. The Dancer was played mostly in aggressive decks while it was in Standard, including Bant Aggro, Devotion to Blue, Collected Company, and Morph decks. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard, and doesn't look super well positioned to do so. At number 9, it is Rock's War Monk, who even has Monk in its name. This monk brings impressive stats as a 3-mana 3/4 with Lifelink. Lifelink is a nice keyword ability, especially against aggressive decks, as it makes it very hard for your opponent to race you. It was played in Bant Aggro decks in Standard, Extended, Modern, and Legacy. It still sees a bit of play in the sideboard of Modern Collected Company decks, but it has been more than 10 years since Rock's War Monk last gained a point. Creatures have gotten significantly better over the years, and he's simply no longer good enough to see any significant play in Modern or Legacy, so there's a good chance it won't be on this list in the future. At number 8, it is Whirling Dervish. This is actually the oldest monk of them all, as it's the oldest card that was retroactively given the creature type during the Grand Creature Type update. This 2-mana 1/1 comes with protection from black and gets a counter on your instep if it does damage to your opponent. For the first 3 years of competitive Magic, the Dervish was regularly played in a variety of aggressive green decks. Black was commonly played, and the protection often made it unblockable and difficult to kill. These early aggro decks typically ran 2 in the main deck and 2 in the sideboard. While the card may not look like much today, it's important to remember that creatures in the early days of Magic were much worse than they are today. For the time, this was quite the impressive beater. By today's standards, the Dervish isn't nearly as impressive, so it's no surprise that it hasn't gained any points since 1997. At number 7, it is Soulfire Grand Master, another Tarkir monk. This 2-mana 2/2 comes with lifelink, and even gives all of your instants and sorceries lifelink, which is a nice upgrade for your burn spells. It also has a really nice activated ability, which allows you to return the next instant or sorcery spell you cast during a turn to your hand. It's the kind of card that works pretty well in a variety of decks. It's a nice 2-drop for aggressive decks that are running burn spells, and a nice control deck win condition since you could just keep looping your spells. As a result, it was played in a variety of Jeskai decks while in Standard, including Control, Midrange, and Aggro. So far, though, it hasn't gained any points in other formats. At number 6, it is Abbot of Corral Keep. This monk was one of the first cards to feature an effect we see all the time today, the red impulsive card draw effect, where you exile a card and have a limited amount of time to play it. It wasn't the first time we saw this effect, but Magic Origins was the first set to come out once they decided to make that kind of effect more common on red cards, and this was one of the first competitively viable cards to sport the effect and really showcase how good it could be. But yeah, in general, the Abbot does a ton for a 2-drop, though you often have to wait to play it until a bit later, so that if you hit a land with the effect, you can still play that land. But still, he's a 2-mana 2/1 that draws you a card a significant chunk of the time. That's a pretty good card. And the Abbot also comes with Prowess, which means he loves it when you cast non-creature spells. Unsurprisingly, the Abbot is largely seen play in aggressive red decks. You generally need a very low curve for the Abbot to be at its best, because the lower your curve is, the more likely you'll be able to use the card it exiles right away. In Standard, it was played in mono-red, blue-red, and red-green aggro decks, and more recently it's been played in Pioneer and modern variants of red deck wins, where it's continuing to put up points. It has a good shot at moving up this list. At number 5, it is Azusa, Lost But Seeking. She was printed in Champions of Kamigawa, which means she was one of the first cards to actually be printed with the monk creature type. This legendary monk comes with the powerful ability to allow you to play 2 additional lands on every single turn. That means the turn you play her, you can play out 2 more lands if you've got them. Effects like that are often not quite as good as they sound, because making sure you have the lands to take advantage of such an effect is not always easy. As a result, Azusa didn't really see any play shortly after being printed. However, some years later, a deck emerged in Modern that could put her to good use, Amulet Titan. This is a deck that looked to combine Amulet of Vigor with the Ravnica bounce lands. When you play one of these with the Amulet in play, it untaps, which means you can tap it for mana before it returns to your hand. Obviously, this combines really well with Azusa, since you can just play the land and get the mana over and over again, 3 times in a single turn if Azusa is in play. This lets you produce 6 mana out of 1 land, and you can do it all in a single turn, and that means you can power out something like Primeval Titan. Amulet Titan has been a major force in Modern since 2014, and it looks like that's going to continue, meaning Azusa is going to continue to accumulate points going forward. At number 4, it is Avacyn's Pilgrim. This is a monk that's a mana dork, which is kind of interesting, as most mana dorks in the game tend to have the druid creature type. I guess most of the druid mana creatures tap for green, and that's a big difference, and flavor-wise, he dedicated himself to Avacyn, and that's more monk-like than druid-like because he's not dedicating himself to nature, but still, it's kind of an interesting distinction here that this is a monk. Anyway, 1-mana creatures who can tap for mana are always pretty nice because they can, of course, accelerate you to the point where you can just do more powerful things more quickly than your opponent. The Pilgrim was a staple in both block and standard, showing up primarily in aggro and mid-range decks, and it's found some limited success in Modern where it's been played in Humans and Birthing Pod, but it hasn't gained any points since 2017, and there are cards behind it on the list that are much more active these days. At number 3, we have another Jeskai monk in Mantis Rider. The Rider is a 3-mana 3/3 with 3 keyword abilities: Vigilance, Flying, and Haste. This combination of keyword abilities means that the Rider gives you an evasive creature that puts your opponent on a very fast clock because it can attack right away while also hanging back and protecting you if necessary. While in Standard it was played in Jeskai midrange and aggro decks, but it's found the most success in Modern, where it was played in human tribal decks. Mantis Rider has seen a ton of play in Modern since the deck has excellent mana and lots of human payoffs, making Mantis Rider a great fit. It's not hard to play it on turn 3. Over the last year or so, human decks have seen a decline in the format, but I think Mantis Rider is fairly likely to gain more points in the future, perhaps as the result of a reprint in a Historic or Explorer anthology. At number 2, it is Monastery Swiftspear, another Tarkir monk. The Swiftspear is one of the best 1-drops in the entire game. It's a 1-mana 1/2 with haste and prowess, and that's a ton of value for the cost. This allows it to represent an incredibly quick clock in conjunction with cheap non-creature spells. It's especially impressive in red aggro and burn decks. It's awesome to point a burn spell at your opponent while also augmenting the Swiftspear so that it does even more damage. It has an impressive resume of multi-format success, having gained points in aggro and burn decks in Standard, Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy. It is going to keep gaining points going forward, and it does have some chance of eventually passing our number 1 card, which is another Tarkir monk, and that card is Monastery Mentor, which also has prowess and the ability to churn out 1/1 monk tokens with prowess every single time you play a non-creature spell. The Mentor can add huge amounts of damage to the board in a hurry. While it has only seen some modest success in formats like Standard and Modern, it has thrived the most in Eternal formats, where there are lots of powerful and free spells that trigger this ability. In those formats, Monastery Mentor serves as a great win condition in a variety of decks. In Legacy, this has primarily been Miracle decks, and in Vintage, the Mentor spawned an entire archetype named for it. Ultimately, Monastery Mentor was too good for people to be allowed to play a full 4 copies of it in Vintage, and this has led to it being restricted in Magic's most powerful format, which tells you a lot about how good this card is. Even with the restriction, lots of Vintage decks are still playing the 1 copy they are allowed, and overall, Monastery Mentor will continue to accumulate points in the Eternal formats going forward. It will be interesting to see if it can continue to outpace Monastery Swiftspear. So, those are the 10 monks that have been the most successful at Magic's highest level of competition. If you want to own any of the powerful cards you saw in this video, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared on this list. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on the over 500 other MTG Top 10s, including several more that look at creature types, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.